This episode contains adult themes and is not appropriate for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, the world. This is They Will Kill, a true crime podcast. I am Courtney Eck.
And I'm Sadie Eck.
And we are sisters, and we're here today to talk to you about murder. And I don't know much about this case, except that it's from the UK, and I do believe we're dealing with a serial killer. Yeah?
Yep. Yeah. I don't like this guy, you guys. I don't like him.
I know all week Sadie's been like, I don't even think this is good. And I'm like, it's just because you're frustrated, because serial killers are the most frustrating, but they're also the most fascinating. So I'm excited. I'm sorry for your life, but I'm really excited.
Well, it's one of those that I'm giving the people what I hope they want. It's a doozy.
It's a journey.
Well, yeah, it's just... The guy sucks.
Well, I can't wait.
Let me tell you all about him.
Thank you for taking one for the team, and take it away.
Dennis Andrew Nilsen was born on November 23rd, 1945 in Fraserburgh, Aberdeenshire, Scotland. He was the second of three children born to his parents, Elizabeth and Olav. His father was a Norwegian soldier who had traveled to Scotland in 1940 as part of the Free Norwegian Forces, following the German occupation of Norway. After a brief courtship, he married Elizabeth in 1942, and the newlyweds moved into her parents' house. The marriage between Nilsen's parents was rocky. His father made little time for his wife. All three of the couple's children, Olav Jr., Dennis, and Sylvia, had been conceived on their father's brief visits to see Elizabeth. After the birth of her third child, Nilsen's mother concluded that she had, quote, rushed into a marriage without thinking. The couple divorced in 1948 when Nilsen was 3. Elizabeth's parents had never approved of their daughter's choice to marry Olav and were supportive of her after the divorce and helped her raise their grandchildren.
His name sounds so familiar. I'm really excited to hear if I know who this guy is, but that name sounds so familiar.
Yeah, he's pretty popular as far as serial killers go, but not covered a lot, which surprised me. So Nilsen was a quiet yet adventurous child. His earliest memories were of family picnics in the Scottish countryside with his mother and siblings, and long countryside walks on the shoulders of his grandfather, who he was very close to. Despite only being 5 years old, Nilsen vividly recalled these walks as being some of the happiest times of his life. He later described the stage as one of contentment, and his grandfather being his, quote, great hero and protector. Whenever his grandfather, who was a fisherman, was at sea, quote, life would be empty until he returned. By 1951, Nilsen's grandfather's health was in decline, but he continued to work. On October 31st, while fishing in the North Sea, he died of a heart attack at the age of 62.
Wow.
Yeah. His body was brought ashore and returned to the Nilsen family prior to burial. In what Nilsen later described as his most vivid childhood memory, his mother, weeping, asked 5-year-old Nilsen whether he wanted to see his grandfather. When he replied that he did, he was taken into the room where his grandfather lay in an open coffin. As he gazed upon the body, his heart was beating strongly as his mother told him his grandfather was sleeping, adding that he had gone to, quote, a better place. Later, Nilsen would state that this had been the most traumatic event of his life, and that it was at his grandfather's burial when his concept of love and death converged together into a, quote, hazy mess of misperception.
Well, that's a thin threshold he was teetering on. God.
Yeah, and having a 5-year-old myself and a 95-year-old grandmother, I think a lot about how to describe death to him, when it's inevitably going to come up. And they say to just be really clear. Yeah. And, talking about going to a better place and sleeping and all of that just really confuses kids.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
We used to nanny for those kids whose parents just didn't tell them that their mom was dying until she was dead. And, I can't imagine what that kid's probably killing people right now as we speak.
No, he's
No,
probably
he's not.
lovely.
He's a lovely boy. But yeah. And also, I don't think 5-year-olds necessarily need to see their dead grandparents, but it certainly isn't going to like trigger me to become a serial killer.
Exactly. Well, that's what I was thinking. The good
Yeah.
news is people, if you mess up describing death to a 5-year-old, they probably won't become serial killers.
No, I've read studies. They are going to serial kill people if you screw that up.
After this, Nilsen became an introvert who never opened up to adults and rarely to children his own age. At home, he seldom participated in family activities and retreated from adult family members who tried to demonstrate any affection towards him. He grew to resent the attention his family gave his brother and sister. Nilsen envied Olav's popularity, but was close to his younger sister, Sylvia. They often talked and played together. Nilsen would often go to the beach alone to swim. One day when he was 9, he was swimming when a particularly strong current started to pull him out to sea. He screamed for help and waved his arms in the air, then went under the water, thinking he was going to die. Just in time, an older boy grabbed him and pulled him to safety. Nilsen remembered his rescuer's strong hands and smooth body touching him all over as they made it back to shore. He thought about that image often and became an avid masturbator at the age considered young for boys, which was like 9 or 10 years old. Mm-hmm. Just a brief trigger warning for molestation. It doesn't last long, but just a heads up. Mm-hmm. Not long after this, he snuck into his brother's room one night and fondled his genitals while he was sleeping. Nilsen started to suspect that he was gay. His brother also had the same suspicions and started teasing him about it. Nilsen was terrified. Olav would tell his peers at school. It was the 1950s and homosexuality was still very taboo. Nilsen decided to fondle his sister, hoping if he touched her, it would help him get over his sexual interest in men. He told her that boys and girls needed to, quote, explore one another, and she agreed to take off her clothes and let him touch her. After a few minutes, he realized this wasn't helping him, so he stopped. In 1957, Nilsen's mother married a builder named Andrew Scott. They went on to have 4 more children in as many years.
Holy shit. So that makes 7? Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah. As his parents' house filled with children, money and space both became tight. Nilsen wanted to escape, and at the age of 14, he joined the Army Cadet Force, viewing the British Army as a way out. After finishing his schooling, he joined the Army Catering Corps to train to become an Army chef. Nilsen excelled in his Army duties. He later described his 3 years of training as, quote, the happiest of my life. The camaraderie at the barracks was something he'd never experienced before. Everyone was friendly with him and accepted him the way he was. Some of his colleagues regarded him as odd, but they never made fun of him. He kept his homosexuality a secret. It was illegal for gay people to enlist in the Army during the 1960s. He bought an expensive camera with his first paycheck and became a self-proclaimed photographer on the base. This allowed him to live out some of his fantasies without taking too much of a risk.
How so?
Well, I'll tell you.
Oh, great.
In the evenings, he would gather some of the men in his barracks together for a photo shoot. He would make the men pose as if they had died in battle. Later, after the photos had been developed, he would masturbate over the pictures. During this time, Nilsen began to drink heavily. He described himself and his friends as a, quote, hard-working, boozy lot. They recalled Nilsen often drank to excess in order to ease his shyness. On one occasion, Nilsen and a German soldier got drunk together, and Nilsen passed out. When he woke, he found himself on the floor of the man's flat. No sexual activity had occurred, but this incident fueled Nilsen's sexual fantasies, which involved his sexual partner being completely passive. The fantasies would gradually evolve into his partner being unconscious or dead. When drinking with his army buddies, Nilsen would also pretend he was passed out drunk in the hope one of his colleagues would take advantage of his supposedly unconscious body.
Oh, buddy.
But sadly for Nilsen, this never happened. In 1967, Nilsen was deployed to Yemen to cook at one of the prisons. While there, he had his own room for the first time in years. He bought a painting titled The Raft of the Medusa.
I'm very familiar with that painting. That painting's horrible. Have you seen it?
It is, yes.
It's very upsetting.
Yeah. Do you want to describe what it looks like?
Well,
do you remember?
I just remember it's like a sinking raft, right? And it's like everyone's in agony, very like perilously close to dying on this tipping raft.
Shipwreck.
Yeah, not exactly what I would hang in my room. Like it's not a decorative piece. It's more of a museum piece.
Yes. So yeah, the painting depicted some survivors of a shipwreck on a small raft. In the bottom left-hand corner of the painting is an old man with the naked body of a dead young man in his lap. Beside them was another dead man with the lower half of his torso missing.
Right. I forgot about that sweet detail.
Mm-hmm. It became his ritual to masturbate to this painting every day after lunch.
Oh, boy. That's paints a very clear picture of this guy and his mental state. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can post maybe I think it's okay maybe we'll see. Maybe I can get it on Instagram. We can put it on our website for sure.
For sure. Yeah, it would be a good visual.
Yeah. One night while out drinking heavily at a bar, Nilsen called a taxi to take him home. As soon as he got in the car, he was hit over the head with a heavy object and passed out. When he woke up, he was in the trunk of the taxi.
What?
Mm-hmm. When the trunk opened, Nilsen grabbed a tire iron and knocked the taxi driver to the floor before beating him unconscious.
Whoa.
Yeah. He then locked the man in the trunk of the taxi. He hitched a ride back to the prison and never heard what happened to the taxi driver.
I mean, wow.
Yeah. I know. I think it's a good indication of how strong he is.
Uh-huh.
And, I mean, like, in this case, good for him for getting out of that terrifying situation.
Yeah, totally. But bad for the world for a serial killer not getting stopped in his tracks.
Right. So, after 11 years of military service, Nilsen was terminated after having a violent fight with his roommate. At the age of 27, Nilsen moved back in with his family for a few months as he considered his next career move. On multiple occasions, his mother voiced her concern with Nilsen's lack of female companionship. She really wanted to see him marry and start a family.
Mm-hmm.
One night during this time, Nilsen joined his older brother and his brother's wife to watch a documentary called Victim, which covers a blackmail plot against several gay men in the 1960s. After the movie, Olav and his wife made it clear that they hated homosexuals. Nilsen strongly disagreed and spoke up in defense of gay rights. The two brothers got in a fight. The next day, Olav informed his mother that Nilsen was homosexual. Nilsen never spoke to his older brother again and maintained only sporadic written contact with his mother, stepfather, and younger siblings.
Wow.
Yeah. He decided to join the Metropolitan Police and moved to London a week later to begin the training course.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And also, Olav, that was shitty. That was a shitty thing to do. But,
yeah, you shouldn't out people. Shouldn't out your siblings, especially in an outspoken homophobic family.
Right, in the 1970s.
In the 19th, yeah, all of it.
He completed his police training in 1973, but after working for a few months, he couldn't stand the guilt of being a police officer and a gay man who frequented gay pubs and had multiple one-night stands with men.
Oh, God.
So he resigned. He briefly worked as a security guard until he found a job in the public sector helping unemployed people find work. His job allowed him to study the behavior of London's unemployed and homeless male population more closely. In 1975, Nilsen met a man named David. The two quickly became a couple and decided to move in together. They found a ground floor flat in Cricklewood and negotiated a deal with a landlord where they had exclusive use of the garden at the back of the property. The pair lived together happily for a while, but the relationship didn't last. Later, David insisted that although Nilsen had never been violent towards him, he berated him regularly, and by early 1976, the pair began arguing with increased frequency.
I thought this was where it was going to take a turn and he was going to fall in love and live happily ever after.
Yeah, no, not this jerk.
Shit.
I'm sorry.
Can you imagine, though, if it had turned out that way and then our listeners were just like, what the fuck?
I just wanted to tell you a little history of a guy that once lived.
He once lived. He had kind of a shitty family, but then, you know what? It turned out okay. He found a guy and they fell in love, you guys. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Things went pretty well for him. Have a good week. Talk to you later.
Okay, bye. Following a heated argument in May of 1977, David moved out of the flat. By late 1978, Nilsen was living a solitary existence. He had experienced at least 3 failed relationships in the 18 months after David left, and he later confessed to having developed an increasing conviction that he was unfit to live with. During this time, Nilsen's drinking increased to the point where if he wasn't working, he was drunk. He began painting his face in heavy makeup to darken his eyes, whiten his face, and color his lips in purple, creating the illusion of a corpse. He would then masturbate while staring at his reflection in the mirror, pretending he was having sex with a lifeless body.
Oh boy, that's a terrifying image.
Yeah. Yes. On December 30, 1978, Nilsen wanted to go out and party. He was lonely and looking for a man to hook up with. He walked down to his local pub, sat at the bar, and almost immediately an attractive young man named Stephen Holmes walked up to the bar and ordered a drink. Nilsen noticed Stephen and guessed he was about 17 or 18 years old. What he didn't know was that Stephen was a few months shy of his 15th birthday.
Oh, no. Oh, God.
Yep, 14 years old.
Jesus.
Stephen tried to order a drink but was refused when he didn't have an ID. Stephen was leaving the bar when Nilsen asked him over and invited him back to his place for a drink. Stephen reluctantly agreed. They walked back to Nilsen's flat and spent the night drinking heavily. He tried to have sex with the boy, but he was too drunk, and they both passed out in bed together. When Nilsen woke up in the morning, Stephen was still sleeping. He became very worried that Stephen would want to leave when he woke up. After caressing the sleeping boy, Nilsen decided Stephen was to, quote, stay with me over the new year whether he wanted to or not.
Oh, God. I'm already so scared.
He grabbed his necktie that was hanging on the bedpost and wrapped it around the 14-year-old's neck, strangling him until he was unconscious. Nilsen loved the feeling of power that overcame him and said he was captivated by his own strength. Nilsen noticed Stephen was breathing, but still unconscious. He got a bucket from the kitchen, filled it with water, and brought it back to the bedroom. He placed Stephen's head in the bucket until the boy stopped breathing.
Oh, God.
Through gritted teeth, Nilsen said, quote, let's see if you can leave my apartment now, you son of a bitch. Okay, take a deep breath. The awfulness isn't quite over.
Oh, good.
He proceeded to masturbate over the body twice and then decided to wash the dead boy and dress him. He kept the corpse overnight while he tried to decide how to dispose of the body. He finally decided to bury the boy under the floorboards in his flat. A few days later, he was curious to see Stephen's body, so he removed the floorboards and took out the corpse, which hadn't yet started to decompose. He bathed him, wrapped the body in a sheet, and put it back under the bedroom floor.
Ugh.
After 7 months, the stench of decay became so unbearable that Nilsen had to dispose of Stephen's body.
After 7 months?
7 months.
Holy moly. That's good information to have, question mark?
Well, I think it got really unbearable, like really gross. This is a continuing thing for him, so just be prepared.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
I just didn't realize it takes, I don't know how long I thought it took for a body to decompose, but I would think after 7 months, like, the worst
Yeah, and
of
this
it
was
would
the
be
winter
over.
time, too. Like, it started in the winter that, he murdered him around New Year's. And so I think by summer it got really bad, but I think for a while it was cold enough, especially.
Frozen, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like the floorboards of his apartment, you just lift up the boards and it's dirt underneath.
Sure.
So who knows? But yes, 7 months is a very long time.
Yeah.
He built a huge bonfire in the backyard. His neighbors would be able to see the smoke, but they wouldn't be able to see what he was burning. He dragged the body out of the house and put it on the fire. He added a car tire he had in the yard to hide the smell of decomposition.
And he's in London, right? Like he's in
Yes.
in London.
Yes. And that's what, because he does this multiple times. Sorry to spoil alert, but I don't know much about London in the 1970s, but to just like burn tires in your yard.
Yeah.
Seems a little crazy.
Yeah. It's not like Roman times or something where they just drop their peepees out the window. Like it was like a proper city as far as I'm aware.
Yes,
in the
1970s.
Yeah.
But yeah, there you go.
Good for you, guy.
So after Nilsen got rid of Stephen's body, there was a void in his heart. He was alone again, and he wasn't happy about it. On October 11th, 1979, Nilsen attempted to murder a student from Hong Kong named Andrew Ho. who he had met in a pub and lured to his flat with a promise of sex. Nilsen attempted to strangle Ho, who managed to flee from his flat and reported the incident to police. Nilsen was questioned in relation to the incident, but Ho decided not to press charges. 2 months later, Nilsen met a 23-year-old Canadian student named Kenneth Ockenden. He lured Kenneth to his apartment and strangled him with the cord of his headphones while the student was listening to music. He took pictures of Kenneth's dead body in various poses and buried him under the floorboards.
So there's 2 now.
Yes.
Oh, wait, no, the one got burnt. Right.
Caught up.
But he's going to do it all over again. He didn't learn from the last time.
Right. He doesn't learn for a very long time.
Oy.
Yeah. 5 months later, on May 17th, 1980, he killed his third victim, 16-year-old Martin Duffy. Martin was a catering student from Birkenhead who had hitchhiked to London without his parents' knowledge. Nilsen brought the boy back to his apartment with a promise of a nice meal and a place to sleep for the night. He strangled and drowned the boy instead. He put his body under the floorboards as well.
Yeah.
After the murder of Martin, Nilsen began killing in a frenzy. Before the end of 1980, he killed further 5 victims and attempted to murder 1 other.
Wow.
Only one of these victims, 26-year-old William David Sutherland, has ever been identified. Nilsen's recollections of the unidentified victims were vague, but he graphically recalled how each victim had been murdered and just how long he kept the victim's body before disposing of them.
Mm-hmm.
With most victims, Nilsen masturbated as he stood alongside or knelt above the body, and he confessed to having occasionally engaged in intercrucial, which means in between the legs, sex with his victims' bodies, but repeatedly stressed investigators that he had never actually penetrated his victims.
I love when they say stuff like that makes them so much better.
Yes.
It's something I hear a lot from people.
Yes. Yeah. I was thinking the same thing. I think it's really interesting when the perpetrators have their limits of things that are, like it's okay to murder all of these people and do terrible things to their bodies and, but I didn't penetrate them.
Yeah.
I'm not that much of a monster. Like at this point, just give it up, man.
I know. Seriously. Good for you. Yeah. No, doesn't apply here, bud.
Nope. He explained that his victims were, quote, too perfect and beautiful for the pathetic ritual of commonplace sex.
So interesting.
Mm-hmm. By choosing victims that were mostly homeless or runaways, he was easily able to evade police. Most of the time, no one knew their loved one was missing, so no alarm was raised.
Mm-hmm.
The multiple bodies beneath the floorboards attracted insects and created a foul odor, particularly throughout summer months. Nilsen placed air fresheners beneath the floorboards and sprayed insecticide around the flat twice a day, but the smell of decay and the flies remained.
Oh, God, that's so awful. It's like the movie Seven or something.
Mm-hmm. In late 1980, Nilsen removed the bodies and then proceeded to cut them into pieces to make them easier to move and dispose of.
You should see my face. Oh, God.
I know. He then burned them in a huge bonfire he had made in an empty lot behind his flat. He added another car tire to disguise the smell of burning flesh. When the bonfire had been reduced to ashes, he used a rake to search the debris to find any recognizable bones. He found a skull that was still intact, so he smashed it into pieces with the rake.
I mean, once again, I don't live in a city. I live in a, sort of wooded residential neighborhood, and somebody would still see me doing that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a lot of full-time neighbors, and somebody would still see me doing that. The fact that he's just out there smashing skulls and burning bodies is unbelievable. The 70s, people had fewer environmental concerns back then, but still,
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's crazy.
Nilsen killed 3 more men in the first half of 1981. This time he would wake up after a night of drinking and find the men dead beside him. He didn't remember killing them. When thinking about these victims, Nilsen later casually reflected, quote, "End of the day, end of the drink, end of a person. Floorboards back, carpet replaced, and back to work at Denmark Street."
Ugh. That was his little poem?
Yeah, that's what he said about these men.
Oh, boy.
This time, he dismembered the victims' bodies before putting them under the floorboards. The book that I read talked a lot about the things that he learned, and he was realizing that dismembering bodies when they were already well into decomposing was really awful. And so then he thought, well, I'll start to dismember them when they're not so into it. It's disgusting.
Yeah, I didn't want to comment on the fact. That's why I wish you could have seen my face when you talked about him exhuming bodies and chopping them up. That's
It's awful.
fucking disgusting.
Yes,
So
it is.
good for him again for honing his craft as he went along, but
Yeah.
oh god.
Soon after murdering these 3 men, Nilsen's landlord told him he had to move out. The flat he lived in had been sold and was going to be fully renovated.
Right.
Nilsen went into a panic.
Yeah.
He wasn't sure if he'd be able to dispose of the bodies before he had to move. Despite this, when an opportunity arose to kill again, he couldn't help himself.
Oh, dude. Oh.
On September 17th, 1981, Nilsen was on his way to work when he came across 23-year-old Malcolm Barlow, who was slumped against a wall outside of Nilsen's home. The color was drained from his face and he appeared to be in some pain. Malcolm had epilepsy and the medication he was on was wreaking havoc on his nervous system. He needed medical attention. Nilsen brought him into his apartment and called an ambulance, and while they waited for help, Nilsen learned that Malcolm was mentally disabled and was receiving money from England's Department of Health and Social Security.
Oh no, I don't like where this is going.
The ambulance arrived and took Malcolm to the hospital. Nilsen went on to work like any other weekday. Later that night, Nilsen called the hospital to see how Malcolm was feeling. The nurse told him he was stable and he would be released from the hospital the next day. When Nilsen returned from work the following day, he found Malcolm sitting on his front steps.
Oh, Malcolm.
Malcolm had stopped by to thank him for his help. Nilsen invited him in for dinner. He gave Malcolm 2 alcoholic drinks. When paired with his medication, he passed out before dinner was ready. Nilsen spotted an opportunity and strangled Malcolm to death before he could wake up.
Buddy.
He had one last very large bonfire where he burned household items he didn't need in the move and added the 5 dismembered bodies to the fire as well. He recalls 3 neighborhood children standing to watch the fire. Nilsen later wrote that he felt it would have seemed, quote, in order if he had seen these 3 children dancing around a mass funeral pyre.
This guy said, I mean, it doesn't help that I'm picturing like a British accent this whole time, but it is very like Grimm's fairy tale-y, his whole thing. Like very...
Yeah, and he was intelligent and very self-confident, full-on serial killer glasses.
Oh,
like the glasses he wore, just full-on, all of the serial killers ever to exist
have ever
that wore
worn
glasses. Yeah,
Yep.
he had them in the 70s and 80s.
Yep. Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway.
After the day's work was done, Nilsen took a hot bath. Oh, and the day's work being these bonfires.
Right.
Full of dead bodies.
Right.
Nilsen took a hot bath and decided he was done killing. He wanted to start fresh in his new flat. He told himself, quote, "No more murders and no more of this obsession with dead bodies. You are done after today. Des Nelson, done."
It's amazing what a good hot bath will do for the spirit.
I know. Sometimes it allows me to continue to parent my children in a quarantine. Other people decide not to murder.
The bar was low in the early 80s, too. I could fully see that being like a Calgon commercial.
Oh, God.
They made a lot of steep claims back then, like smoking will, make you healthier, and taking a hot bath with Calgon will cure you of your psychopathy.
So Nilsen's decision to stop killing men didn't last long. After moving to his apartment, he had no access to a garden, and he now lived in an attic flat, so he was unable to keep any bodies beneath the floorboards. For almost 2 months, any men Nilsen encountered and lured to his flat were not assaulted in any way. He did attempt to strangle a 19-year-old student named Paul Nobbs on November 23, 1981, but stopped himself from completing the act. 6 months after his last murder, in March of 1982, Nilsen struck again. He lured 23-year-old John Howlett to his apartment and tried to strangle him while he slept. John woke up, started fighting back, and tried to choke Nilsen. A battle ensued until Nilsen was able to get the upper hand and subdued John. He wasn't able to choke him to death, so he filled the bathtub with water and drowned him.
Oh my God.
Nilsen had scratches on his face and finger mark bruises around his own neck for a week after the murder.
Oh, Jesus.
John's body stayed in the bathtub for 3 days while Nilsen figured out how to dispose of him.
No.
Yep. The book talks about how he was really angry that he couldn't shower, so he had to, rinse off in the
sink. Oh, poor guy.
I know.
God.
Yeah. He finally decided to dismember John's body and wrap his body parts in plastic bags and store them in either a wardrobe, tea chest, or within a drawer located beneath the bathtub. Nilsen attempted to dispose of the flesh, internal organs, and smaller bones of his victim by flushing the remains down the toilet.
Oh, dude. Mm-hmm. I guess they hadn't learned the lessons back then that we've learned in the modern day.
Right? I have a septic tank, and if I put, the wrong ply of toilet paper in our toilet, we're screwed.
Yeah. You gotta be nice to your toilet, man.
Right. He also, sort of a hard transition, he also boiled John's head, hands, and feet to remove the flesh off of the sections of the victim's body. He would do the same thing to all his victims killed at his new flat.
Yeah, I mean, there are so much easier ways to dispose of a body. He's escalating, right? This isn't just...
Well, I think it's... yes. I would say escalating and...
enjoying.
I mean, what do you do when you murder someone and you live in the middle of London and you're on the... you can't bring the body downstairs. He just isn't thinking. He doesn't care.
Right. That's what I mean. He's not using common sense.
No. And he's drunk most of the time.
Right.
And it seems like towards the end here, he really just sort of gives up. He knows that he's not going to be able to get away with it for much longer, is the impression that I get.
Yeah.
So he's just like, I'll do my best until somebody finally catches on to what I'm doing.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, when I'm drunk, I think lots of things are a good idea. But it's more like eating cottage cheese with jam or something,
Right.
Not
Yeah.
boiling human hands
Yes.
for disposal. Yeah.
Right. So Nilsen killed again in June of 1982. His victim was 27-year-old Graham Allen. Nilsen brought the man to his flat for a meal and made him an omelet. While eating, Graham, who struggled with serious drug and alcohol abuse, he passed out. Mm-hmm. Nilsen couldn't help himself and strangled him at the kitchen table. The smell from the decomposing bodies was becoming a problem for Nilsen. His neighbors were starting to complain. On January 26, 1983, Nilsen killed his final victim, 20-year-old Stephen Sinclair. Stephen was last seen by friends walking with Nilsen to the tube station. At Nilsen's flat, Stephen fell asleep in an armchair after drinking too much. Nilsen approached the man, knelt before him, and said to himself, quote, "Oh, Stephen, here I go again," before strangling him with the ligatures constructed with a necktie and a rope.
Ugh.
Noting crepe bandages upon each of Stephen's wrists, Nilsen removed these to discover several deep slash marks from where Stephen had recently tried to kill himself.
Oh, no.
Yeah. When he disposed of the body, the bags used to hold Stephen's remains were sealed with those same crepe bandages Nilsen had found on his wrists.
Ugh.
On February 4th, 1983, after one of his neighbors complained to him about their blocked toilet, Nilsen wrote a letter to his landlord complaining that the drains of the flat were blocked and that the situation for both himself and the other tenants of the property was intolerable.
Wowie, man.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, and his reasoning was that if maybe he could get on top of it, if he was the one to complain,
Right.
that maybe that would help move suspicion away from him.
Right.
I don't know. I really think at this point he's just like, whatever, I'm done.
Seriously.
On February 8th, 1983, Dino Rod employee Michael Catran responded to a service call to fix the clogged drains at the apartment. Opening a drain cover at the side of the house, Michael discovered that it was packed of flesh-like substance and numerous small bones of unknown origin.
Oh, boy.
The smell coming from the sewer pipe was unbearable. He reported his suspicions to his supervisor, Gary Wheeler. Michael had arrived at the property at dusk. He and Wheeler agreed to postpone further investigation into the blockage until the following morning.
Oh, man. Imagine waking up and being like, I gotta go back and deal with that.
Oh, God, no. Before leaving the property, Nilsen and a fellow tenant talked with Michael about the source of the substance. Upon hearing Michael exclaim how similar the substance was to human flesh, Nilsen replied, quote, It looks to me like someone has been flushing down their Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Wow. It's very specific.
Yeah, right.
Also not something that people do.
Right.
Ever.
Right. So at 7:30 a.m. the following morning, the men returned to the apartments. They couldn't help but notice that the clogged drain had been cleared overnight. Mm-hmm. This aroused their suspicions. And it turns out that Nilsen went down, obviously, and cleared the drains overnight himself, hoping to get rid of the evidence. Mm-hmm. And he also he tried to go to Kentucky Fried Chicken.
No.
He did. He tried to go to Kentucky Fried Chicken and get chicken so that he could flush it down the toilet, but they had closed already, and so he couldn't.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Yep.
Just the image of flushing Kentucky Fried Chicken is hilarious, but oh, boy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's disgusting.
It's disgusting. Well, it's like your last case where it's such a childish thought process. It's like, I remember trading for a My Little Pony when I was in kindergarten. I brought whatever, I traded my toy for a My Little Pony. And then I told Mom that I'd found it behind the television, thinking,
She'd be like, oh, okay.
Oh, weird. I didn't see that there when we moved in 6 months ago, Mm-hmm. It's that kind of like, I'm going to place this thought in their head and then confirm it.
Right.
Flushing Kentucky Fried Chicken. And, my first thought would be like, it's a pet or a rat or something,
mm-hmm.
like there's a million other things that could get stuck in a sewer pipe, but Kentucky
mm-hmm.
Fried Chicken.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So Michael the plumber found more scraps of flesh and 4 bones in the pipe leading from the drain which linked to the top flat of the house. The bones looked as if they originated from a human hand. They immediately called police, who, upon closer inspection, discovered further small bones and scraps of what looked like either human or animal flesh in the same pipe. Mm-mm. These remains were taken to the mortuary at Hornsey, where pathologist Professor David Bowen advised police that the remains were human, and that one particular piece of flesh had been from a human neck, and it bore a ligature mark.
Wow, he could tell that.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. After learning Nilsen was the person who lived on the top floor, police decided to wait outside the house for him to get home from work. When Nilsen returned home, the detectives introduced themselves, explaining that they had come to ask about the drain blockage coming from his flat. Nilsen asked why the police were interested in his drains, trying to play dumb. They asked Nilsen if they could go into his apartment to talk about what they had found. He agreed and led them upstairs.
What a bozo, man.
Yeah, he has 3 dead bodies in his apartment right now that he hasn't disposed of.
And they're like, what's that smell? And he's like, I had Kentucky Fried Chicken last night.
Mm-hmm. The 2 detectives and another police officer followed Nilsen into his flat, where they immediately noticed the terrible smell of rotting flesh. Mm-mm. Nilsen asked again why the police were interested in his drains. They told him that the blockage had been caused by human remains. Nilsen feigned shock and bewilderment, stating, quote, "Good grief, how awful." In response, one man said, quote, "Don't mess about, where's the rest of the body?" Nilsen responded calmly, admitting that the remainder of the body could be found in 2 plastic bags in a nearby wardrobe, from which the detectives noticed the overpowering smell of decomposition. The officers did not open the cupboard, but asked Nilsen if there was any other body parts to be found, to which Nilsen replied, quote, "It's a long story. It goes back a long time. I'll tell you everything. I want to get it off my chest. Not here, but at the police station."
Oh, that's chilling.
Mm-hmm. He was then arrested and cautioned on suspicion of murder before being taken to Hornsey Police Station. As he was escorted to the station, Nilsen was asked whether the remains in his flat belonged to one person or 2. Staring out the window of the police car, he replied, quote, 15 or 16 since 1978.
Oh, man. Ooh. Can you imagine?
Could you? No, I was just going to say that. It's so scary.
That's
it's so scary.
So scary.
Yeah. And when you see pictures of this guy, he's just really unassuming. Other than the serial killer glasses, like kind of a, skinny, unassuming white guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're just thinking like, oh, this guy got into a quarrel with his lovers or something, kind of run of the mill, not great, but not awful. And then,
Yeah.
ta-da, you have a serial killer in your car.
Yep. And he was the boss.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, he was the boss at this unemployment office. Like, just total run of the mill. So crazy.
Also, the crazy thing is that he probably just could have made something up like that. Like, look, these are my lovers. We got in a big fight. I killed them. I tried to flush them because I'm a drunk and I'm lazy or, whatever. But just to, like, give up the goat, like, that's just...
Yeah. I mean, maybe for one, but for three?
I don't know. It's some kind of sexy orgy gone wrong. Who knows? There's, like, ways to just stop at 3. But just I'm glad, thank God. I mean, thank God he admitted all 15. But...
Yeah.
Also, you could have you're already chopped into pieces. That's what's so crazy. You have dismembered these bodies and they're in plastic bags. It's a simple enough process to take them out of your house and put them in a river,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Just so lazy.
Yeah.
I'm mad at the I'm mad at the potential of the serial killer that went I'm mad at his lack of motivation.
That's right. Try harder, man.
You have so much potential. It's wasted.
So that evening, authorities searched Nilsen's apartment where they found the plastic bags full of human remains. One bag was found to contain 2 dismembered torsos and a shopping bag containing various internal organs. The second bag contained a human skull, almost completely devoid of flesh, and a severed head. And also a torso with arms attached but hands missing.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
The next day, on February 10th, Nilsen offered a complete confession to all his crimes. He also told authorities where they could find the rest of the remains in his apartment. In total, Nilsen confessed to killing, quote, 12 or 13 men and attempting to kill approximately 7 others. Police interviewed Nilsen on 16 separate occasions over the following days in interviews which totaled over 30 hours.
Wow.
He was adamant that he didn't know why he had killed all those men, simply saying, quote, "I'm hoping you will tell me that," when he was asked for the motive for the murders.
Mm-hmm.
He was adamant that the decision to kill was not made until moments before he did it. When questioned as to whether he had any remorse for the crimes, Nilsen replied, quote, "I wished I could stop, but I couldn't. I had no other thrill or happiness."
Mm-hmm.
He also emphasized that he took no pleasure in the act of killing, but, quote, worshipped the art and act of death.
Right.
A further search at Nilsen's flat revealed the lower section of a torso and 2 legs stowed in a bag in the bathroom, a skull, section of a torso, and various bones in the tea chest.
Ugh.
The same day, Nilsen accompanied police to his previous residence, where he showed them the 3 spots in the rear garden where he had burned the remains of his victims. Investigators discovered over 1,000 fragments of bone from the garden, mostly blackened and charred by fire.
Holy shit.
Nilsen was officially charged with 6 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder and was brought to trial on October 24th, 1983. After hearing all the evidence against him, Dennis Nilsen was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life in prison with a recommendation that he serve a minimum of 25 years.
You think? God.
I know. I mean, the United States justice system is really messed up.
Yes.
But we wouldn't sentence a serial killer.
I'm always so
to 25 years to life.
It's like Canada, too. They.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think most countries that aren't barbaric like ours.
Yeah. No, I agree with you.
Yes.
I am not a fan of our justice system, but I am a fan of our sentencing for serial killers.
Yes, me too.
And murderers in general.
Yes.
Yeah, like 18 to 25 years for the death of 15 people just doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah. I mean, well, here we go. I'll give him credit. The minimum term of 25 years to life was replaced by a whole life tariff by Home Secretary Michael Howard in December of 1994. So luckily, and it took a little while, but somebody came in and was like, all right, you know what?
What are we going to do with him in 25 years? Yep, you're ready to go. It seems.
Yeah, we'll keep this one in prison forever.
Jesus.
Yeah. So this ruling ensured that he would never be released from prison. Nilsen remained in prison until his death on May 12th, 2018.
Wow.
He died of a pulmonary embolism. He was 72 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. So Nilsen is known to have killed 12 young men and boys between 1978 and 1983.
Wow.
It is suspected that the true number of his victims may be at least 15. Of Nilsen's 8 identified victims, only 3, Stephen Holmes, Kenneth Ockenden, and Graham Allen, had a permanent address at the time of their murder, with the remaining victims largely, though not exclusively, consisting of homeless, runaways, and sex workers. It's no wonder why Nilsen was able to get away with his crimes for more than 6 years.
Yep.
I'm going to dedicate this episode to 14-year-old Stephen Dean Holmes, 23-year-old Kenneth Ockenden, 16-year-old Martin Duffy, 26-year-old William Sutherland, 23-year-old Malcolm Barlow, 23-year-old John Howlett, 27-year-old Graham Allen, 20-year-old Stephen Sinclair, and the 7 remaining unidentified victims of these senseless murders.
That's so crazy. Poor babies and all youngsters, man. He really went for the young ones, huh?
Yeah. Yep, he liked them young.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a combination of preference and then also strength, don't you think?
Yeah, I know that was with John Howlett, the one that fought back so hard. He wasn't particularly old, but he was very strong. And I think that definitely scared him.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, those poor boys. God.
I know. And that's the story of fucking terrible,
Fuck you.
awful...
Fuck town. Idiot.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Dennis Nilsen.
I can totally see why you don't like him. I get so frustrated. I know, again, it's like a joke that it's a lack of motivation, but it's so sloppy. And it just feels so like entitled, you know? I mean, serial murder is entitled, period, no matter what, but he especially feels, I don't know, it just feels especially gross just because he was so lazy about it and so careless about it. And the fact that he got away with it, you know, that he picked vulnerable people who you know already had horrible lives. So to think that these poor people, these parts of these vulnerable populations get killed by this lazy shithead, it's just so sad. It's so frustrating.
Well, and it's also a lot of the stuff that I read, it was like a sympathetic tone to it towards Nilsen. And I don't quite understand. They called him like the gentleman killer, meaning that he was a gentleman to his victims. Things like that, you know, I don't know if they were trying to portray the fact that in some ways he would bathe the victims and he worshipped them. It's like, it doesn't fucking matter, man. This guy was a monster. And
well, and it sounds like a deep self-loathing that he puts them on a pedestal, but he also steals their life because he's lonely and wants to quote unquote like keep them because he hates himself. And there's obviously some homophobia and shame, and I get it, you know, I understand where this is all coming from, but grow up.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I
Also,
think it's a justification for some major psychopathy. And again, like if the worst thing that's happened to you was that your grandpa died when you were 5.
Exactly.
Like he was born to be triggered into murdering multiple men and boys.
Well, here's a question. So the guy who bonked him on the head in the taxi, what if a serial killer made another serial killer? You know what I mean? Because it seems like up to that point, he was just sort of self-loathing and depressed. And, you know,
he definitely had already started the fantasies of like being with dead bodies. But could be like the thing that threw him over the edge. Totally.
And I can understand how, you know, you loved your grandpa the most. You did get a lot of attention from other people. So you have this sort of weird, uncomfortable, you know, maybe slightly inappropriate, but not totally immoral or illegal fascination with sex and death, because you don't like yourself and your parents don't like you, and you know you're a homosexual back then, which was very complicated, and that makes sense. But you know, let's just assume that was as far as it was going to go until another serial killer gets a hold of him, bonks him on the head, and just like sort of passes the baton.
God, what's that?
I was going to say, what's that Denzel Washington movie? Where they...
What is that?
Fallen.
Fallen. Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. I rewatched that like within the last, I say recently, but it was like a year ago. That movie is garbage. That is
garbage.
really good movie to watch with friends right now on
Yeah.
Netflix party, though. If you want something, I'm going to help me remember that for our next Netflix party because, man, that movie is so bad. But yeah. Is on my side. Yeah. I'm demon. I got demon. And then he's like watching from above as he's passing it really fast. And he's like, son of a bitch. That demon is too fast.
Yeah. I wonder, that must have been on like reruns a lot or something because I've seen that movie so many times.
It's pretty memorable too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I remember thinking it was so good, so cool when I first watched it.
Yeah.
We had limited options back then. Anyway.
Yeah, so we can produce our own version with Dennis Nilsen and his taxi cab killer.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying? Yeah, back to the original point. I'm wondering if the head injury from the blow is what triggered.
Yeah, well, it certainly didn't help, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeez Louise, man. Well, good job.
Yeah,
that is
thanks.
a lot to slog through.
There's a lot of details out there. I kind of had to truncate it and move through. I really didn't want it to be a two-parter. Like I said, I got into this and I was like, I just don't like this guy. I don't want to talk about him anymore.
Yep.
But if you, dear listeners, are interested, there is just like so much information to read. So go get it.
Yeah,
and I think
I didn't know that story. The name is very familiar, and I feel like there's another case with the last name Nilsen that, and you kept starting to tell stories, and I was like, oh, I have heard it, and I'm like, nope, not what I was thinking. Like that weird couple, what were their names? That she was like a sex worker. It's been covered a million times. There was a movie made about it with the guy from The Affair. And anyway, let's play a cool guessing game, guys. No, but I've never heard that story. So good job.
Thanks.
And yowza. I also never get over the idea of just flushing body parts. That's a lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yep. Yeah. And again, like there are lots of more details about like the disposal of bodies if you're into the gory stuff.
Right.
Have at it.
No, I think you painted a very abundant picture of this guy and his day-to-day and what it must be like to live in that apartment and be him. It's so, I don't know, man. It's lazy and slovenly and sad. It does feel very much like a scene out of Seven.
Yeah.
Like his life must have been like a scene out of Seven. Just him like crying and masturbating and flushing human bodies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like really disgusting and awful.
Going to his office job, hating his
Oh
life.
God!
Like,
Oh
it's
God!
awful.
Oh God! Oh God! With his glasses.
Yep.
Oh
Just gray and rainy for like every day of his whole life. Yeah.
no! Tires burning. Like 1 hour photo, but way worse.
Oh God. Okay. I'm done. I'm suddenly very sad. I've had a good day. I felt good today, and now I'm just like, oh.
No, I mean, it's how we like our serial killers.
Yep.
Really fucking awful. Yeah. So good job.
Thanks.
And 1 hour photo is actually pretty good. It's actually
a good movie.
It holds up, unlike Fallen.
So
Good job, man.
Thanks.
That's enough of that guy.
Yeah.
Oh, but you know what it made me think of when we were talking about, one of our listeners actually posted on Facebook an article about how the sons and grandsons of World War II soldiers, specifically the sons, I think, that there was a huge spike in serial killers right around the time that our boy Dennis was flushing human hands down the toilet. They attribute a lot of the spike in serial killing in the 70s and 80s to World War II.
Yeah, it makes so much sense.
It really does, because, and they specifically were like, you mentioned in the Chichijima incident episode, just talking about the atrocities and how over the top fucking awful World War II was. And it was such a horror show. And so it would make sense that these men would come back from that and just be horrifying parents. And then their kids would kill people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really so sad and unfortunate to think about how that doesn't just, you can't, it doesn't end with you. Your kids inherit your trauma and then experience your trauma through your parenting. And so, whew, it's heavy shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we should link to that.
Yeah,
I'll add it
super
to
interesting.
maybe to that episode.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah.
Do
we have businesses to attend to?
Yeah, man. Got a cool business coming up. We are about to hit 10,000 listeners, 10,000 downloads.
Yes.
Which is brain explosion emoji.
That's right. Not 10,000 listeners yet, but 10,000 downloads total.
10,000 downloads, which feels amazing
Yes.
because it's all been just organic growth. This is you guys sharing us because we don't have any advertising or anything like that yet. So this is just you guys telling other people. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
As always. But we're also going to do a big giveaway when we hit 10,000.
Yep.
We have our They Will Kill merchandise, like our swaggy stuff. And then my wife, Laura, is an artist.
An incredible artist.
Yeah, she's fancy. When we were set up, that's how we met. And my friend who set us up said she was an artist. And I was like, oh, God, here we go. Like, I just pictured, I don't know, just bad art. And I looked her up and I was like, whoa, she's legit. She makes an actual living as an artist. So she has very generously donated a couple of cool things for us to include in the giveaway. So once we hit 10,000, man, we're going to put that on social media and we'll do a drawing. And also just hitting 10,000 makes me so happy.
I know. I was thinking, I think it's tomorrow. For today, for us, is the 7th. I think tomorrow is our 3-month
anniversary.
Yeah, which is...
That's nuts.
Courtney and I were talking about it the other day, that it feels like it's been much less time, and also like a year. It feels like forever.
Forever.
Yeah, that we've never not done this. So
yeah.
Thank you so much for supporting us and enjoying it.
Yes.
We'll give it back.
Tell your friends.
Yeah, please. Tell your friends.
Tell your friends. We'll have more Patreon bonus episodes coming up. So like we said, general bonuses are free for now. So if you're signing up for Patreon, you're kind of doing it out of the goodness of your heart. But we are adding at least like one more bonus episode this month. The pins are almost here. We've been talking about these stinking enamel pins forever, but they're supposed to, fingers crossed, arrive tomorrow, which is Friday. And as soon as they do, we'll post about that too. But anybody who signs up through the month of May to Patreon, regardless of the tier, gets a free enamel pin. And then if you sign up for the $5 and $10 tiers, you get extra goodies. We're being extra spoily and generous right now to our Patreon supporters. Yeah, for the month of May. And while we're in quarantine, and all of our episodes are free. Because eventually, half of our episodes are going to go under that lock, and you have to pay for them. Yeah. But for now, they are yours to enjoy. And we got to shout out our new Patreon supporter, Angela S., who is also an old friend of ours, and just a sweetie pie and a badass, and a fan from day one. So
that's right. I mean, she was our roommate for a while, but both Courtney and I, all of us lived together. So if she supports us, even though she lived with us for a while, we're pretty decent people. So thank you so much, Angela.
Yes, thank you so much. It's funny because as you were telling that story, I was kind of picturing the house that we lived in. It was this massive farmhouse in Portland. It was basically a flop house, and it wasn't that long ago. It's sort of interesting to remember how we lived. God, we were so happy.
Yeah, it was really a special time.
One step away from being condemned, but very beautiful.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It was fun.
It was really fun. So thank you, Angela. And thank you to all of our Patreon supporters and all of our listeners in general. We love you very much. It's a full moon tonight. It's a super moon. Shed all the things that don't no longer serve you. It's the death of things that don't no longer serve you. So do that. And you can find us on social media. Keep supporting us. That's where we are telling you all about these things, all these goodies and things coming up. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at They Will Kill. Our website is theywillkill.com. You can email us at theywillkillpodcast@gmail.com.
Rate, review, subscribe, please.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you, AJ Bergantz, for our music.
Yes, thank you. I think I'm going to drop the lawsuit.
Oh, good. I'm glad you came to your senses. All right.
I think the full moon is that's what I'm going to let go for this super moon.
That's right.
Unfounded lawsuits. Seems like a good thing to let go of.
And remember, Don't.
think I was
I've
gonna
got
s-
one.
Yeah.
I got it. Don't
Tell me.
Don't flush your Kentucky Fried Chicken down the toilet, please.
That is some sage wisdom. That is an age-old adage. Just
Take it from me, guys. Take it from me.
what do they say? A 10-piece in your mouth is better than a bone down the john.
That's what I say.
You know what I would really love right now, though, is some of that mashed potatoes and gravy.
Oh, man.
I don't think it's vegetarian. I'm like a lifelong vegetarian, but I'm real loose about it, obviously, because I was putting bacon on celery a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
Shit,
Mashed potatoes and
that's-
gravy.
Like, what are those mashed potatoes even made of? It's just certainly not a potato or like an actual starch.
Flour. No, I guess.
Like some sort of whipped substance, like a
Rice. I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, just starch. It's like the water from other potatoes that are actual potatoes. They just take that and they whip it a bunch and they put that delicious
It's like
gravy
that
on top.
garbanzo water that people do.
Oh God,
things
which
with.
I love garbanzo beans, but the idea of that water just. Ugh. People make cocktails and stuff out of it. I'm like, ugh. What's it called? What is that called? It's got a funny name too, like aqua fresca. What's it called? Garbanzo water. What's it called? Aquafaba. There you go. Aquafaba. Ugh. I don't know why it's so gross. I don't like it.
We love you guys so much. Thank you for listening.
I love you, except for Aquafaba. You are not welcome here.
Goodbye.
No, I love you so much. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.